welcome to TYT Community Live, the Social Justice Hour, here on the TYT Network, a show paneled by members and fans of the Young Turks, and occasionally TYT Network special guest hosts. I'm your host, Jeff Waldorf. I'm joined here by Jordan French, Stephen Buckley, and my special guest, Dan Spearin from Truth Mashup, also one of the network partners here on the TYT Network. Check him out on, of course, youtube.com/cynically-tested when he does the Truth Mashup show and the Truth Mashup podcast. So, now that I've got introductions out of the way, we've got some fantastic stories, social justice stories, really, really important things to cover. So we're just going to kind of dive right into it and start out with how terrible CEO pay has gotten. And by terrible, I mean terrible for us, not for them. The Economic Policy Institute just released a report on CEO pay versus worker pay, and the results are devastating. The report is by the left-leaning think tank, the Economic Policy Institute. They looked at the trends of CEO compensation since 1978, and they found that beginning in the 1980s, CEO compensation began to rise much faster than worker pay, and during the mid-90s, began to skyrocket, hitting a massive 383 times more than worker compensation. Now, it's a ratio of 383 times to 1. Now, through the 2000s, there were a few ups and downs before finally setting at a whopping ratio of 295 to 1 when adjusted for inflation. Now, all in all, CEO compensation at the largest corporations have actually risen by 937% since 1978. Now, the report also looked at the growth of worker compensation during the same time period and found that worker compensation grew at a paltry 10% since 1978. 10% versus 937%. That is just an astronomical difference. That is what we talk about when we talk about income inequality. Now, the EPI concluded its report by saying that since CEO compensation grew so much faster than even other highly paid workers, the market for skills was not responsible for the rapid growth of CEO compensation. That's right. So that old argument that you hear from conservatives of how they're better, they're smarter, they're better at their jobs, they have more skills, and that's why they get paid so much, is bullshit. Now, they also say that if CEOs took a little bit of a pay cut, that there would be no loss of productivity or output. So if they were to share a little bit of their gains with the workers who actually make them rich, they wouldn't lose a damn thing, except maybe a little bit off their bottom line. Now, I look at the study, and I'm pretty much blown away by the numbers. 937% since 1978. Now, the timing here isn't a coincidence. Remember in 1976, we had Buckley v. Vallejo, right? The case that pretty much decided that money was political speech. And shortly after that decision, would you look at that? It jumped 29 to 1 for the ratio. Now, that's actually not a bad ratio at all, I think. I think even 50 to 1 is pretty reasonable. You're the CEO. You do deserve a good chunk of the payoff. You took the risk. You built a business, and there should be that incentive there. A little bit of inequality is okay. But when it gets to massive levels of inequality, that's when you run into problems. Anyway, after the 80s and Reagan's Morning in America, this number went fucking crazy and actually got really bad until Clinton. Actually, after Clinton. It got even worse after Clinton and during Clinton. Now, we had a good economy under Clinton, but at the end of his term in 2000, that's when it really hit the peak. Now, with all of that said, I want to go to my panel and ask, what do you guys think about these numbers? Do CEOs deserve such high pay? And who should decide what's fair when it comes to CEO compensation? And finally, what effect does this inequality have on your estimation on the overall economy? And we'll start with you, Stephen.
Okay. Well, I mean, for me, I mean, it's absolutely outrageous and egregious that the CEOs are getting paid that much. But it's important to point out that this is certainly isn't all CEOs. I mean, Cenk, he's CEO of the Young Turks. He's certainly not getting paid 300 times more than the average worker at the Young Turks, because they're not getting paid much to begin with, as most of them tell us. But the that's what they always complain about. But for me, it's almost like one of the arguments of saying, oh, the CEOs, they've got to get their pay. When we had, well, it was across the world when we had the huge banking collapse, and you say bankers' bonuses. Well, they've got to get these bonuses, because if they don't get good pay, and similarly the CEOs, if they don't have a good wage and good salary, then they're going to leave. They're going to go to other companies, and we want to have the brightest and the best. But as you said, paying more money to these people doesn't mean that you're getting the brightest and the best. And for me, as to who should be responsible in regulating this pay, I really don't think the government should have any real say in how a private firm regulates kind of who gets paid what within it. You know, apart from minimum wage and such, you can fix it via kind of tax rates and stuff for the rich.
So you'd be against a maximum wage?
Yeah, I think I would be against a maximum wage, but I think the people who should be in charge. I mean, honestly, I'd have to look into more detail in terms of maximum wage. That I'd maybe agree with some astronomically high rate that's almost where it is now, and just say no further. But I think it should be the shareholders of companies that dictate the wage. Now, I know there's a large problem that, you know, I'm sure there's hundreds of kind of individual instances where you say, well, the shareholders are the CEOs of the companies, already the people who are getting paid by the companies, so they'll set their own wage, and that could be a problem with these ever-increasing CEO pays. But I think the shareholders should play a larger part, certainly in these big companies where this large disparaging gap has happened.
Right. I'd have to say that I think that the problem with giving the shareholders, and I'm not saying I'm advocating for the government to step in. I'm just saying that there's that issue with, you know, as long as the company is doing well, the shareholders will pretty much allow a CEO free rein to do what he wants, and that even includes, like, hey, you know, we did really good this fiscal, you know, this quarter. I want a raise, and they'll be like, yeah, sure, we're doing great. Why not? Here you go. And that's what I see happening a lot. And you know, there is that where CEOs are able to give themselves raises, and that can create some problems. But let's go to you, Dan. What do you think?
You know, we talk about this a lot on this show, which is the press and the media. And I mean, this is where I think the huge failure from mainstream press, and especially financial press, where you, like, a lot of the times, you know, it's like when you watch sports, you have a former catcher and pitcher telling you about sports. Great. The problem with that in the economic field is that there's a lot of vested interest happening in financial reporting. So it took legitimately in the States and in Canada and a lot of places in the world the Occupy movement to actually get the phrase income inequality into the newspapers at a rate that where it should be. The other interesting thing about this that I thought this study was that if you look at industries like fast food, which we've seen a lot of action recently in terms of raising their minimum wage, well, this study shows it's about 1,000 times the pay in that specific industry versus CEO to worker. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that are getting out of control. In Canada, the same thing. It's about January 3rd. The average top executive in Canada is making what the average Canadian makes in a year. So, yeah, like, I know what people are talking about with, you know, the immediate shrills of communism if we start talking about maximum wages. But the problem is these people are taking down the economy by being reckless with how they actually operate their businesses. And the problem is they don't believe in government until their businesses get into severe trouble and then expect bailouts. And that system needs to change. So I would suggest corporate income tax rates rising, which I know sends people screaming. But more importantly, it would be really great if the media at some point started to talk about these things in sane sentence structures. Like the idea that we get away with these people, the idea if you don't make 1,000 times what your worker makes, it's communism, which is legitimately what you hear. Or the idea that if you raise the corporate income tax, the businesses will just run screaming from the country. At some point, it would be nice if people called them on their bluff.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's go to you, Jordan. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, my big issue with this is not so much that the CEO pay is so high as it is that the average worker pay is so much lower. Quite frankly, as long as if you're paying your people enough, to where they can maybe not even necessarily live nice plush lives, because I don't know that a company owes you that. But at least you pay enough to make ends meet to where they're not having to live off government programs while working 40 hours a week. I think you can pay your CEO whatever you want, and this can be a successful business model. Companies have shown this, and not just like in niche markets either. You've got Costco that competes in the retail industry against companies like Walmart that does this and does just fine. You got In-N-Out Burger and fast food that competes against McDonald's and Burger Kings and the companies, and that pays their employees very well, and it does just fine. So that's, hey, if you want to pay your CEO and whatever they want to make, as long as the people on the bottom, can go to work and then come home and not go without, pay your CEO whatever you want to pay. But yes, I know I'm not trying to just turn something for the sake of a phrase. But to me, high CEO pay is not the problem. It's low average worker pay that's the problem.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really, really good point about that, because that also fits into the discussion about income inequality. And it's not. I say it's both problems. I think right now you have CEO pay too high, and that's making it so that the worker pay is so low, right? Because once again, you get into the thing where these CEOs have so much extra money that they're never going to be able to spend. Well, what do? They either hoard it, right, which takes it out of the economy. They might reinvest it in their business. That's good. We want them to do that. But most likely they'll often do stock buybacks to inflate their prices, to inflate their company's worth, and then use that money to pay themselves higher bonuses. It makes absolutely no sense. And so I think that fits into the economic inequality argument. Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree with both of you, and I'd also just add that the problem here, of course, is that when you have the guy at the bottom ask, Oliver Twist style, could I have some more? Sorry, we can't afford it. And that's the real issues that we're having right now in a lot of these places where income inequality is an issue in all of these countries, is that much like in Canada and the States, that's the issue, is that yeah, okay, great. I'd agree with you that whatever, we don't have to have a ceiling on CEO wages or compensation. But the problem is that they turn around and use it when the guy who's making $8 wants to make 10. And of course they use things like, well, then Big Macs are going to cost $20 magically. Of course, when you come to Canada or Ontario, our minimum wage is around $11 now. I assure you, we're not spending $20 on Big Macs, so magically it's okay. And you've seen that those memes go around social media from different places in the world where these restaurants in different countries have given their workers wage. So this goes back to, why don't we ever see more of this in the mainstream media? Why don't you see these kinds of things being talked about? This is an out and out lie. And I really would love to see it get called out more. You can't afford it. You're choosing not to, and we know where the money's going. It's going back to the top. So if those two things weren't connected, I'd be a little bit more lenient to say, whatever, that your CEO can make whatever you want.
And the money doesn't always just go back to the top. It also goes into, ironically, stopping minimum wage laws.
Right.
And you see a lot of lobbying dollars being pushed towards candidates that will oppose any sort of attempt to not end inequality, because you can't, right, but reduce the levels of inequality to a level that won't destroy the economy.
And it's sad because we keep, as a progressive, movements or whatever, we keep letting them kick the goalposts to the right. Like, I know we even started off as conceding that we'd be okay with like 100-1, or we like 200-1. But when it gets to like, where's the bar? And that's the other issue that I have is that we really do have to start getting a lot tougher with this, especially, and we'll talk about this a bit later in the show. But we're a debt society right now, North America especially. We are dependent on credit cards and loans, and our houses are mortgaged out, and it's everything's kind of teetering, and it's the selfishness of that industry, of these industries and these CEOs that don't see the crash coming. Like, people are not well off. So this is another issue. Like, you're not just gambling with your own company, you're gambling with the entire economy.
Right.
I think just to go.
And when you gamble with something that's, go ahead.
I was just going to say just 2 quick points. Firstly, I think we'd all want everyone's wages to keep on increasing. It's just a matter that if the CEO pay is going to kind of increase his own salary by 20%, then everyone else in the company gets a 20%. And if you keep the percentage increases the same, then I'd kind of be happy with that. And as to Dan's point with the media, I think one of the points, and this certainly isn't the only reason why the media isn't covering it that much, is simply because, same with climate change, it's just not that particularly a sexy or interesting topic that people can get excited about. They should get excited about, and there's lots of interesting things like talking about these sort of charts and stuff in these studies. They're interesting, they're intriguing, but for the mainstream media, to them, it's not, we're talking about numbers and we don't want to, that's a bit confusing for our audience. And they just think it's too complex for the audience. They're wrong in that, but that's one of the reasons, I think, why the media doesn't cover it.
Well, I don't know how you guys have over in the UK or even in the States, but like, what I think is always funny is how they cover financial news, right? So they'll bring in an economist from said bank, but then they'll bring in like a left-wing economist, and he's always highlighted as like a union economist or a socialist economist to give you what is really like the sane news, which is, perhaps this is a little out of control. And that's really where it fails. Like, that's where you had guys like Matt Taibbi and Rolling Stone become kind of rock stars in these fields, because we lack a coherent and I would say like a really good voice in the press that tells you about the financial markets. Like, let's be really blunt and honest. Most people can't read a stock ticker. Most people are not engaged in the the minutiae of the Wall Street Journal. And when you hear like, well, this is just common knowledge from the news, you think, well, yeah, we can't raise the corporate tax rate because businesses might run screaming. And the guy said it on television, and then the guy said it in the Wall Street Journal, and those are the financial guys. So, and of course, they've got vested interests, like we saw with Jim Cramer, and that would be the far extreme of it, going back to the last crisis. Or I shouldn't say the last crisis, but the last giant crisis. But that's where these things need to start going, in my opinion, is you need to start having these conversations and start changing the narrative. And Occupy was a good start for that, but I'd like to see it continued. And as we always say, it's sort of a pipe dream because we don't have a lot of faith in the mainstream media. But at least there's places like this now to start shaping those conversations on social media.
And to sort of get off on a little bit of a tangent, I was thinking earlier today about basically like the Tea Party, and you kind of, and I had this thought. I'm like, where's the left's Tea Party? Why are we not pushing our party more to be more progressive, like what the Tea Party is doing to the Republican Party? Now, the Tea Party has drove the Republican Party off a cliff, and so we wouldn't want to do that, right? But nonetheless, where is our progressive Tea Party, right? Where is our force to push our politicians to actually legislate on these issues, to push on these progressive issues, and we just don't have it.
Especially when the bottom line is that like, this is the economy, folks. Like, if Jim in Oklahoma cannot pay his visa bill ever again, and and he can't buy a car and buy a house, we're some serious problems. And I brought this up, I think, on the show before, but you go through the hilarious stories from the millennial generation marketing campaigns from the big companies. GM, what if we make different color cars? That's not the problem. Like, people are in serious debt. And I think that's what's really interesting. And, you saw here in Canada, to answer my own question about the media, the problem, of course, as we always know, is vested interests all around. So here in Canada, we got into a few months of starting to look at unpaid internships and how they're really bad. And then what happened? Well, we found out that two of our big communication companies, of our big three, like we call them, Bell and Rogers, were running a lot of these internship scandals themselves, and a lot of the press was too in the press room. So all of a sudden, that coverage seemed to fall off the radar a little bit. So that's the unfortunate thing about it is you need these places like the Young Turks Network, and you're starting to see more and more of them. Here in Canada, there's a bunch of young people that are starting a new company called Ricochet to address just that. And that it really does start from a public awareness. I think, though, it starts from your media, because people need to read it. People don't know. Like, we could be snobby about it and be like, we know, but the average person, all they get is a complete diet of lower taxes, lower corporate tax rates, everything will be fine, unions are bad, and it needs to be turned around.
Right, and just to make one more point about the media before we move on, I think another problem with how we cover this discussion on the media is that we have, we basically have our major media organization. Whenever someone brings up the question of income inequality or the problem of income inequality or the question of what we can do about it, and raising the minimum wage, this major news channel, which is the most trusted in America, we did a story on this yesterday about that, they are always on one side, always against it. And so when you have a media empire, essentially, that is so large and so all-encompassing, and when you have so many people listening to it, you're right, they are going to get that steady diet of can't raise the minimum wage, it'll kill jobs. You can't raise taxes, it'll kill jobs. If you raise corporate taxes, the corporations, like you said, Dan, they'll run screaming for the hills, and the entire economy will implode. Well, if you continue to have inequality at such a high level, the economy is going to implode anyway. It already did in 2008, and it did in 1929, and we're probably heading for another one.
Just to finish that point, what you're talking about with Fox or whoever, this is forgetting just those extreme wings. This is just the left has just done whatever you want to call it, progressive politics, the left, quote unquote. They've done a terrible job of marketing those ideas to the average guy. Like, they've lost a huge communications battle over our lifetimes. And so now our generation is kind of left holding the bag, trying to go, okay, wait, I'm in student debt, I'm working at McDonald's, I can't get paid, where's my union at my workplace? Oh, the union actually, the older folks at my union sold out my union 3 years ago, and so now there's like a two-tiered aspect into my union. So all of these, these things are coming to play. And but I'll give you an example here. CBC, our main business show, the one that they promote, has a guy named Kevin O'Leary. Americans will know him from a show called Shark Tank. He's a crazy billionaire. Like, he's really not, but that's the role he plays on television. And that's the public broadcaster that has these jokers on there. People that say things like, like income inequality is fantastic, and that, the people that are starving in Africa, it just gives them incentive to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. With, we talked about this before on the show with Glenn Beck, that there's all these kind of rodeo clowns that have the pulpit. But that's on the CBC here, which is the left-wing media, right? And so that's what I'm trying to say. It's not just the Fox News. It's gotten much deeper into just the collective wisdom is. And you'll also see, like you said tonight when you read this study, it's a left-wing think tank. Very rarely will you hear the news media say a right-wing think tank. And that's really interesting, too. Think tanks from the 70s throughout now have had a large history of being right-wing, and over 30 years we kind of have forgotten that, and it's just like, oh, it's just a general consensus from so-and-so think tank. But there's very few of the socialist ones, or whatever you want to call them.
Right. Okay, Jordan, you get the final word. Take us out, and we'll head out to the next segment.
Man, yeah, Dan again brings it with the excellent points, and so I guess after Dan's launched a real nice, nuanced conversation there, I guess I'll close us with a talking point, and just point out that the golden age of America. And let's be real. When we say the golden age of America, we mean the golden age for white middle class males in the 50s and 60s. But it worked for that segment of the economy because laws were designed to make it work for that segment of the population. With those laws gone away, the same economic policies would bring about the same results, just more broadly. But yeah, so under Eisenhower's administration, a Republican president, we had a corporate tax rate of $900, and CEO pay compared to average employee pay was nowhere near where it is now. And not only did companies do just fine, they built America into the superpower to end all superpowers. And now we're becoming less and less relevant in the world. We've got more income inequality in America now than ancient Rome had when it collapsed. That's a devastating statistic. And I get that whenever we say there was a 90% income or 90% corporate tax rate, there were loopholes. The effective tax rate was not 90%. You can avoid all that in the comments. We're not idiots. But the effective tax rate was still much higher than it is now.
Absolutely. That's an important point to throw in there. It was somewhere around 50% what they paid. But you go ahead and finish your point. Sorry.
But yeah, so this again, not only what Dan says, not only is it right, it's not just the right thing to do and to point out, but historically it bears out that it's true, and that's the accepted fact. The accepted fact in America is that the 50s and 60s were this wonderful time that made us a prosperous nation and a powerhouse to be reckoned with on the world stage. And everything we've done since the 80s is to flee the policies of the 50s and 60s, at least the economic policies that made us, who we are. There are certain parts of the 50s and 60s that needed to be left behind, and we've already mentioned those. But the economic policies had a lot going for them, and all we've done since then is try to throw out as many of them as we could.
Isn't it?
Sorry.
I was going to say, isn't it odd that the family values voters never worry about that? Like, the things that keep families together, like jobs, houses, shelter. Like, that's somehow off the radar. The 1950s and 60s are amazing, except for the part where we did all the things that gave us all these great things, like houses, cars, shelter.
Yeah,
Anyways.
well, Dan, that's because it's morning in America.
Right.
And how else can you enjoy the morning than being outside without a home?
Right.
You have to be outside to enjoy the morning.
I always thought it was a different spelling of morning when Reagan said that, but it's different. I digress.
Clever. All right. We spent way too much time on this, so we're going to have to go on to the VA. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Some bad news for veterans in Alabama, but hopefully we'll be able to get some good news about veterans as well. But first, let's give you the bad. Bad news for veterans in the midst of the VA scandal. Veterans in Alabama now have less help when it comes to getting the care that they need and deserve. Now, what do I mean? Well, 17 VA offices have closed around the state of Alabama, making it much more difficult for veterans to go and get care. Now, these offices help eligible veterans apply for and receive their claims. Now, that's, of course, very, very important. You can't get help if your claim hasn't been processed. Now, there's a spokesman for these VA hospitals, or these VA offices. Spokesman Robert Horton said that, quote, the workload facing the VA offices are increasing because of so many soldiers returning home from Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as the aging population of those who served in Vietnam, Korea, and World War II. Now, here in America, we're really good at making veterans, but not so good at taking care of them. So why did Alabama close these VA offices? Well, that's sort of along that line of thinking. The Alabama Department of Veteran Affairs states that they had to close these offices because of severe funding cuts. Just in the last 2 years, Alabama legislators have cut funding to the Alabama VA system by nearly 50%. Now that is incredibly shameful. But I want to get into what else is shameful. And what else is shameful is the man that Alabama sent to Washington, D.C. And that would be Senator Jeff Sessions, who routinely votes against funding these programs to help veterans. But he has no issue sending them off to war. Now, he was one of 3 senators that voted against a recent bill to expand health care options for servicemen and women. But I'll go into that legislation later. That's our good news. The overall point is that Alabama is Republican-controlled in all 3 branches. And the fact is that you can see where their priorities lie when they're in power with the things that they do. And what they've done is cut funding to vital services that our servicemen and women and veterans depend on. Like I said, they have no issues with sending off our men and women to war. It's just when they come back that they have a problem. It's essentially a military dine and dash, but with some serious consequences. Now, what do you guys think about this? We'll start with you, Dan.
I was being polite and Canadian, waiting for someone to jump in there. Listen, this is what's really depressing about this is when I saw this on the docket tonight to go over. We're having the exact same thing happen here. So in Canada, the Veterans Affairs Minister, they've closed down some of these offices in the great quest for efficiency, and the veterans are fighting back, and we've had some real train wreck PR from our government on it, where they've legitimately not met with them and actually had like confrontations. Which, as a politician, the greatest thing you can possibly do is argue with a veteran on camera. That's good stuff. So that's our conservative government right now doing that, though. And they're, of course, the same ones that wanted to go to Iraq with America, and we voted it down because we had a liberal government at the time. They were in opposition. And then, of course, they doubled down in Afghanistan when they came to power. And Canada, for the first time, was really at war for a long period there because of Afghanistan. So over a decade they were, and that was one of the longest wars we've had as a country. And so we're having all these veterans come home. So it's the same thing here that you're seeing there, and it is absolutely shameful. You could get into the minutia of the financing and how do you pay for it, but it's just, if you're going to do these things overseas, you're going to send an army there, they need to be taken care of when they get home. And there's really no words for how shameful it is, especially when I'm sure the same thing happens in the States as it does in Britain and Canada, which is, every Veterans Day or here Remembrance Day, they love to trot them out. They love to pose in front of tanks, and they love to wear the poppy in our country. But then, somehow the poppy falls off on the way to the Veterans Office to help these people out.
Exactly. And yeah, you're right. It's once again, it's shameful, and it does happen a lot here in the States. I mean, we've seen a lot of our Republican politicians, and I believe there are some Democrats that do it, but I can't think of offhand. So it doesn't happen that often. But you'll see a lot of Republican politicians like Ted Cruz and Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin go out there and oh my God, support the troops, or you're not an American. But then the first thing that they do when they get back into the Congress chamber is cut VA benefits.
Yeah.
And so it's oh, well, I guess I see how you're supporting the troops. But anyway, let's go to Jordan next. What do you think, man?
Yeah, there's another great example because Dr. Pate, you gotta get down, buddy. I love to call out self-defeating conservative approaches to government, or I guess I should say self-fulfilling prophecies in conservatism, and this is one of them. Because one of the major kind of hot button issues right now is what is the role of government in healthcare, and the VA is the one full single payer system we have. Even more so than Medicare or Medicaid, because not only is it government funded, but it's government administered more or less. And so these offices that they're shutting down in the name of saving budget are the offices these are not like health clinics they're shutting down. These are the offices that help veterans find out what they're eligible for and how to get health care. These are basically this is the liaison wing of the Alabama VA, the marketing wing, if you will. You don't know if you call it marketing when it's a nonprofit, government organization, but you know what I mean. These are the guys who make sure our veterans get to the VA to get the care they're taking care of. So, of course, what do? When it's time to save money, well, let's cut that down. And now we can say, hey, look, the VA is, it's going over budget, and it's not even taking care of as many people as it should be because you cut down the wing that made sure the people knew what they could get in the first place. We saw this in Arkansas. Again, I'm sorry to always try to tie news back to my home state, but I love the place. It's what I'm going to do as long as you keep letting me. The nationwide watch private option that lasted 1 year before it almost got knocked out again. The compromise that was reached to finally get these idiots in our GOP state legislature to renew it was they gutted the funding for the marketing of it. Again, the thing that reached out to the people, these poor people that were covered and may not have even known it, the Republicans said, all right, fine, we'll keep the program in place, but quit telling people they can use it, was basically the way they held it hostage. And so, that's what's going on here, and that's frustrating. And the other thing that's frustrating to just stop blaming conservatives for everything is and Dan got into this a little bit. This is what we do as Americans. I don't want to speak to what Canadians or the Brits do because that's those aren't my people. I don't want to point fingers, but here in America, man, again, another local example for me. There was a proposal to build a new VA clinic here in Little Rock, and it was going to go in what's kind of a nicer gentrified neighborhood. And that neighborhood rose up and said, no VA clinic in our neighborhood because they were afraid, there's a disproportionate number of the homeless in America are veterans because we send them over there and they come back broken and can't hold down a job and they end up homeless or on the streets. And these wealthy white Arkansans in Little Rock didn't want more homeless people in their neighborhood, so they said, screw this VA expansion, go fuck yourself, veterans. And that's, we've got a history of doing that in America, man. Everybody will get up and post memes on Facebook about how President Barack Obama doesn't love America or support the troops because he stood at attention and didn't put his hand over his heart. And then those same people, they'll post pictures of troops, but what they actually mean is, hey, support this troop that comes home, like you see in the movies, that comes home from war, and you pin a ribbon on his chest, and you tell him how proud you are, and your kids look up to him. Basically, what they have in their mind whenever they say, we need to take care of our troops after war, is this imaginary soldier that doesn't need help. The men who we send off in these, at least in our generation, these stupid, needless wars, that come back broken and just, can't function in society, then we turn around and we say, you quit feeling sorry for yourself, yada, yada, yada. You need to be stronger, represent your country better or whatever. And, we're pathetic people, man. Like, support the troops until they need support. That's really what we mean whenever we go on these flag, just lathered rants or whatever. And it's pathetic. We don't give a damn about these boys. If we did, we wouldn't have sent them over there in the first place.
Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan raised some good points there. For me, like for Republicans, and this kind of VA kind of shutting down all these admin offices, it's a triple win for them. The Republicans, they get to start as many wars as they want. They've got attention deficit disorder. They start a war and then move on to the next one without thinking about the consequences that will happen in the future with any wars that they've just started. They shut down the administration clinics, which saves money. They think, oh, that's great. And then by shutting down the administration clinics, it means that the veterans aren't even aware of what help they can get. So the Republicans don't even have to, or the government doesn't even have to pay for the help that they should be receiving. So it's like they're killing two birds with one stone there. And for the Republicans like Jeff Sessions, like I'd go as far as to say that they hate the troops because they simply don't care. I think what Jordan was saying about how they have this kind of imagined idea of what the perfect of what the returning soldier is like. Now it's this perfect kind of war hero, kind of 6 foot tall, got no problems, no limbs blown off, no kind of mental disorders that he's come back with. But that's not the case. What the Republicans seem to think of when they think of, oh, we've got to kind of support the troops, they're not thinking of supporting individual men and women who are serving. They just support the ideology of what the army represents. They don't care about what the actual individuals who constitute, kind of make up the army. They just like the idea of the army, and that's the real problem. And people like Jeff Sessions, they don't care about the troops. They're hypocrites. They like to stand next to them, get photos with them, waving the flag and things like that. I mean, here in the UK, it's certainly not as bad as what you have in the US. When we have our D-Day memorial, and we had the 70th anniversary recently, okay, the politicians are getting that, but it's certainly not as a polarizing issue between all the parties. We just all get behind the troops, and we take care of our troops relatively well. Not as well as we should, not by any stretch of the imagination. We still have a large number of charities that do a lot of work. But Jeff Sessions, he hates the troops. He doesn't want to spend a single penny on them. He's a nasty guy.
I just think that I think you're mostly right on that. But I just want to mention how I'm pretty sure like people like Jeff Sessions and the Republicans, it's not that they hate the troops, it's just that they love the defense contractors who pay them. I mean, this comes down to we're not going to spend money on these troops, these soldiers. Who cares about them? No, I want war because I get paid from the defense contractors. And that's what it really is all about.
I just want to underline one more thing that Steven said, which is really true, and I think maybe it deserves maybe a couple more seconds here, which is that it is really threefold in favor for the Republicans, and same in our country too. And I won't even go by stripe. I'll just go by the government. They really do save money on all accounts. That's what's happening here in Canada. The veterans group were just coming out straight up saying we just stopped trying because it's become such a hassle that we've stopped trying to get benefits in certain cases, and this is where things are getting really criminal, and this ties back into the two conversations we've had already, which is debt. Like, they're not coming home to the 1950s and 60s America, or even in Canada. They're coming home to a situation where it's hard to get a job, it's hard to get, to make a minimum wage, it's hard to make a middle-class lifestyle for yourself, and on top of that, we suckered them in because they were probably fairly poor off to begin with. Like, this is what's really gross is, in Canada, we had these kind of like almost video game-esque trailers that we ran in front of movies here to get people to go to Afghanistan, where it looked like you were, playing Watch Dogs or something, and that's where things are even more kind of disgusting, because it's like, we know you can't afford school, kids, so come join the army. And then when you get home, all of these things that you were promised kind of start to fall apart. And if that would be one thing, if the society itself was taking care of its people, but even if you're not in the army, you know how hard it is. So this is where I really agree with that point that Steven's making, which is we should be harder on the government. They know what they're doing, and they know that if they do these things, people will stop trying to get the benefits. And as you all said previously, that's where you start to have to go, okay, do you really support troops then? Like, are we, not just do we support them, but it is, you could make the argument, I wouldn't because it's kind of hyperbolic, but Steven's not far off with the hate, the hate the troops idea. If you're doing something specifically knowing that a guy who is probably broken trying to get money is going to stop trying, that's a severe level of douchebaggery.
Well, look, I think it's also, I do think it is hate, because the best way that you can support these troops, the best way that you can protect these brave men and women is to not send them into dangerous situations and to needless wars. Some wars do need to be fought to protect kind of the sovereignty of a nation. That's fine. We all agree that some wars have to happen. But Iraq and Afghanistan, they didn't have to happen, and certainly not to the scale that they did as well. And so these people are saying support the troops. The best way to support them is to kind of keep them at home and look after them and not send them to wars. They're actively wanting to send these men and women into dangerous situations. They're sending them to other places to get shot at. That's not a particularly kind act. I see that as somewhat of a hateful act. And so, yeah, I think Jeff Sessions hates all American troops.
I also think that he hates paying for those troops. And once again, this kind of goes into the Republican plan when it comes to all government. And Jordan, I'll get to you in a second. But here's what they're doing with the VA. They cut the funding, and then they point to the VA and say, look at that. That's government-run healthcare. It failed. Absolutely. Do you want that? That's what Obamacare is going to be in 2 years. And that's what all the liberal progressive plans are. Do you want your healthcare to be VA? We did a segment where a Fox News host said exactly that. The VA is one big fat Obamacare. And so it plays in a political angle, and it also goes to their narrative of government can't do anything right, so we should get rid of it and let the private market take over everything. All right, Dan. Dan, then Jordan, and then we'll wrap it up.
No, I think that whether I kind of disagree with the hating the troops to an extent, but I will agree that this is how sad our partisan politics culture has become. Like, listen, there's nobody on this panel is a diehard Republican, support the troops, has a bumper sticker on the car, and that's all they do, right? So I mean, yet all of us agree we should be helping these people. And it's just so weird that this is now also, like, taking care of a guy who came home from war is somehow a talking point to be debated now. And this is just where it seems like every time I come on this show, we have these conversations of, like, it's just step outside the box for 1 second and pretend you're an alien, right? And just think about, okay, so you had a war, yep, and the guy came home, and the women came home, and they need health care. We should cut that. Like, what? Like, it's so absurd that you actually have to have these conversations in society that's where we're going to cut. And it just seems that, once again, we go back to the progressive media and progressives in general failing at persuading the public on this. It always comes down to the weakest in society are starting to get the cuts. And that's my line. That's just the bottom line for me. Is it's so depressing. Our partisan politics has got to a place where we can't all agree. Perhaps we should take care of the people that fought the war.
Good points. Jordan, take us out.
Yeah. I'll close this out with this. Here's an excellent litmus test. I know we've kind of gotten away from the VA here, but I'll try to bring it back around. An excellent litmus test to whether or not your politicians are asking you to support the troops or to support their contractor donors or their defense industry donors is how much is this war the situation the troops are in now affecting your day-to-day life. And if it's not affecting your day-to-day life, the people in power are not asking you to support the troops. They're asking you to support the war and support the money. Now, what I mean by that is we've been at war now for a longer continuous period than any point in our history, and no one on this panel's life is different because of it. We've never had our food rationed. We've never had our energy rationed. We've never had to go, volunteer to factory. None of our jobs have been changed over from producing what they produced before the war to producing something to help the war effort. That's what happened in World War II. In World War II, the government taught people how to grow their own food because food was so important to get to the troops. But now things like logistics, GM hadn't had to stop building cars for civilians and start building it for the troops because now we've hired out all the logistics and all the shipping and moving things during the war effort to private contractors. We're not having to ration our food because we've hired out all the feeding and the food and everything else in a lot of situations over there to for-profit contractors. These wars are all about profit. They're not about public interest. And now that same trend is continuing to tie it back to what started this segment off. Now, what are they doing? How do you know it's about supporting the war and not supporting the troops? Because when these guys come out, they want to privatize what health care they can get and cut funding to the VA. It's all about supporting the money. They're not asking people to go volunteer at the VA. They're asking people to let them privatize the VA. So I'll close with this. If you're watching the show, if you're watching the replay, if you're an American, I'll let you guys throw in a plug for your respective countries if you'd like. Go volunteer at your local VA, man. Those guys, they just need all the love that they can get. I mean, I'm not a medical professional, but, you know, I go over there and just, you know, hang out with the guys, ask the administrator what you can do. I mean, that's what they need help with, like the non-medical stuff, the stuff that we can actually help with. And that's what supporting the troops used to mean. It meant doing in your civilian life something that made a difference in the lives of the men and women in combat. And admittedly, the way the war is today, we can't really do that anymore because these wars are BS. But you can still get back and make a difference in the lives of these guys once they get home. Maybe you're not a doctor. Well, that's awesome. That frees up time for the medical staff that you can go play chess or checkers with the guys and talk to them while they can focus on their job instead of having to, you know, watch these guys and do non-medical related stuff. So get in contact with your VA, go help out, and actually support the troops. Take the bumper sticker off and go spend some time with them.
All right, I think that's well said, and I think I don't think that there's anything I can add to it. So, if you want, we can actually go to some good news concerning the VA. There is some good news for veterans nationally. Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, and John McCain, of all people, have actually teamed up to pass a bill through the Senate to allow veterans access to actual private doctors if they are living over 40 miles away from a VA hospital or have waited longer than a month for treatment. Now, it also allows those who do their job badly to be fired immediately, as well as having an expedited appeals process. Now, this bill was bipartisan and managed to sail through the Senate with nearly all Democratic and Republican support. So truly bipartisan. 3 senators voted against it, all Republicans. Jeff Sessions, who I mentioned earlier, Bob Corker, and Ron Johnson. Now, once again, we're going to beat up on Sessions a little bit here. Sessions made a point of order against an emergency designation provision that would keep the legislation from being limited by budget restrictions. You see, apparently Congress is not allowed to create legislation that would add to the deficit without offsetting it from somewhere else. Now, the emergency designation actually allows Congress to bypass that rule so they can pass it without having to fund, to basically slash something else. Now, on that point of order, John McCain had said, quote, "If it's not an emergency that we have neglected the men and women who have worked to keep us free, then I don't know what it is. It breaks our hearts, it breaks Americans' hearts when they hear these stories of how we've treated these men and women." Now, the Sanders-McCain bill did pass, and it will be on the president's desk soon. So I want to know, I want to ask you guys, if is this enough, or does more still need to be done while the VA continues to get its act together? But before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about McCain here. I have this tendency to want to beat up McCain as well, because once again, I have to point out that he's one of the people that is most sending people off to war, but at least he's saying, hey, I may be a war hawk and I may be always pushing for war and wanting to send people off to war, but you gotta give him a little bit of credit to where he actually plays lip service, and not just lip service, but tries to take care of the veterans once they get back. So a little bit of credit and then a little bit of kidney punching. All in one segment. I'm on a roll tonight. All right, so what do you think? Is this enough? And we're going to start with you, Jordan. Can't hear you, Jordan.
Sorry, didn't realize I was muted. Yeah, my bad. Obviously it's not enough, and I know that you didn't mean it in that way. Is it enough of a start? Absolutely. Like, this is a great start. I mean, it sucks that the problem, it was an issue in the first place, but this is an example of Congress doing what it's supposed to do, and it can't go without saying that one reason why Congress is working is because this is something that was headed up by an actual, ideological pure or ideologically pure member of the government, namely Bernie Sanders, somebody who is less loyal to the Democratic Party, and in fact, may or may not even be considered a Democrat, depending on who you're asking. And so he stood up and said, "Let's do the right thing." And obviously, John McCain has a vested interest in this as well. That it doesn't always seem like he lives up to me, but I'm sure he knows more about what being a veteran means than I do. But yeah, it's a good start, and as long as that's what it is, as long as it's a start, but also as long as it's, or I should say, as long as this is a start and not the whole game, but also in one area, as long as it's not a start, and that is what I kind of alluded to in my previous rant. There's an aspect of privatization of the VA here, and while I think that this particular example of what they're doing is a good mix of public and private working together. If you live too far from the VA, or if you, the VA, the waiting list is too long to give you a place to go, that seems reasonable to me. So as long as that's not money that, that doesn't start a trend of pulling money out of the VA to put into the private sector, then I'm all for it. The private sector is stepping up where there's not a single payer system is a completely different thing, and that's I think us as at least the two Americans on the panel, we're not anti-private healthcare. We're anti-bad healthcare, and whenever you've got a system working against a more effective system like we have, that's what you get. But where a private system can actually help a public system, by all means, let the private system do its thing. So yeah, it's a good step in the right direction. We can't stop here, but I'm glad something got done. I hate that it took something so tragic to get it going, but at least it's happening.
All right, Stephen.
Yeah, I pretty much just kind of reciprocate what Jordan said. It is a start, and it's nice when you've got John McCain and Bernie Sanders, who couldn't really be more ideologically opposed when it comes to starting needless wars, saying, well, okay, we've started these wars, but let's at least look after the troops. And as John pointed out, there's a lot of common sense there. I mean, okay, I'm English and I value the NHS a hell of a lot and kind of public healthcare, but I'm in favour of having some private. If you want to top up on private, then that's fine. And, parts of this bill where they say that if you're kind of quite a large distance away from a VA clinic, then of course you can go to a private one. I mean, that's absolutely common sense in, a country that's as geographically vast as America. I think it's good news, but as to whether it's enough, I think it's just a starting point. I don't want any Republicans or Democrats for that matter, or just the normal public to think, oh, we've passed this bill, therefore kind of veterans healthcare, oh, that's all done now, we can move on to the next thing. No, it's something that you've got to constantly keep looking at. I imagine that there's going to be, because it's passed the House and it's passed the Senate, but they need to still work out some kind of iron out some differences between the House version and the Senate version. So there'll be some changes, and I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe slip something in. There's probably one or two issues with it that will need to be fixed a bit further down the line, but at least they're doing something. And this is a good bill. It's a bipartisan bill, and I'm all for it.
Right. It's not exactly time to hang up the mission accomplished banner. So I'll definitely agree with that. So let's go to Dan. Dan, what do you think?
Well, we almost had two straight topics where we all agreed, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to burst the bubble on that. I do not think this is a good thing. I do think this is the road to privatization. I understand where you're now in a situation in America where these things are almost temporary band-aids that you don't have any other choice to go to. But this is the beginning of privatizing the healthcare for the troops, and this is another failure of the left because we have wishy-washy leaders in progressive politics that won't say, hey, the government is supposed to do certain things. It's not, this idea of big government isn't going to other countries and planting our flag, but big government is taking care of people once they come home from planting the flag, is this great, double standard that I wish somebody could more, accurately explain to me, because this is exactly where the government should be paying for things. The government is supposed to take care of its people, and this is where obviously the Canadian versus American healthcare situation is obviously front and center, where I don't enjoy private options. The government getting off the hook to privatization does not lead to better healthcare services. This is something that should be, if somebody lives far away, we used to send people to them. We used to do things for people, and now it's like, oh well, it makes sense as if they go to this clinic outside and it's private, everything will be fine. Well, yes, that's today, but in 2 years down the road, what's that person doing? And so, no, I don't think this is great. I understand where it's, if somebody's who needs care right now is like, anything right now, please. So unfortunately, that's where we're at. But yes, when you have these people who have no problem sending everybody off to war in every which direction, and then also don't agree that the government can skimp and save when they get home, I do think that's a contradiction in terms, and I do think the government should be slapped around for trying to have it both ways.
Yeah, you bring up some really good points. I still say that it's something, right? And something at this point is better than nothing.
Oh, but that's how
what you're saying.
But that's how the left keeps losing the game. Well, it's better than, yes, because no one will stand up and say the government needs to spend more money on this exact thing, which is taking care of veterans when they get home. And that's what you can't get the other side to do. So we can applaud John McCain, but John McCain's side would never say, let's spend a ton more money on making sure these guys get the care they need. No, let's do the two-tier thing. And it won't
work. I think you're right. Like I do agree with you. I think you're right about that, definitely. But at the same time, this is a situation where you're bleeding, right? You need a Band-Aid. Like, you need something, and a Band-Aid is better than nothing right now. And I hate saying that, and I absolutely agree with you that this is how we lose, and this is how the Republicans and the conservatives win.
And that's how you got a wishy-washy Obamacare.
Yeah, but at the same time, God, you got to have something. I know. Jordan, I know you really want to jump in, man. So please do. I can't hear you, sir.
I'm muting my mic on the actual hardware side to keep the screen from switching over to me. I'm sorry. So Dan's right. Like, his heart's in the right place. I totally get what Dan's saying, and generally speaking, Dan's right. I completely agree with him. However, we're not talking about like the overarching picture. We're talking about this specific issue. And on this specific issue, as long as it is a start in the things that it's right in, and it's not a start but a finish on that one particular privatization part, this is an excellent beginning. And now what I want to get into is that the problem with the VA, at least systematically, is not funding. And I'm going to get pushback from the left on that. The VA is fairly well funded. Now, there are certain clinics you can point to that funding is the issue, but that's not the problem with the system as a whole. And this bill does address the culture even, because it got rid of the performance bonuses, which should kind of be, if you're anti-privatization, that's a very kind of, private market approach, the idea that you're going to pay a public employee more based on performance rather than public service, or rather than a general public service contract, I should say. Like, it did away with that. What I want to point to here, and I tried to do my research and find this interview. I could not find it. I'm so sorry, but NPR did an interview whenever this story was first breaking with one of the guys who worked for the VA and blew the whistle on this in the early days. And just like other pseudo-military related whistleblowers we've seen, whether Chelsea Manning, who is straight up military whistleblower, Edward Snowden with NSA, the same thing happened in the VA. There's this culture of, like, whenever he tried to go through the proper channels and say, and he was the manager of, I believe, a psychiatric department was what his position was. He went from the private sector to the public sector, and he realized that the people working under him were only seeing about 4 patients a day, and these are 30-minute sessions. And then, maybe you want to be generous and say 30 minutes for your paperwork after each session. That means these people were working 4 hours a day, and somehow patients were still being seen in time to get those performance bonuses, and it was just obvious it wasn't going on. But it wasn't an issue of lack of funding. It was an issue of a culture of a lack of accountability that, one, could not have happened in the private sector. If that would have happened in the private sector, that would have come to light, and people would have got busted. But because it's in the public sector, it can. And hey, I have to be really careful what I say here. It's not the VA, but I know someone very close to me who works for a state hospital who is a manager and has to deal with some terrible, terrible, horrible employees that couldn't hold a job down anywhere else, and she can't do anything about it because they're state employees, and there's no recourse of action there. That idea that there is a problem with bureaucracy, that's real. Now, that doesn't mean you then make the jump to these conservative talking points that there's no way a single payer or state-funded option can work. It's just a point to say that the problem is not always funding, and that when it comes to government institutions, you have to be really diligent to keep efficiency in place to make sure that that bureaucracy doesn't become too strong. And I believe you can do that. We as liberals, that's our central kind of thesis of government. That like government has problems. The answer is to fix those problems, not throw out government. And so to tie all that back around, I said all that to say this. That's why Dan is wrong. And in this particular instance, this is a good thing, because our veterans were dying now. They were not getting health care now. Something had to be changed now, and that's what they did. The idea that we're being wishy-washy liberals by not saying let's fix the system. Well, it's going to take a long time to fix the system. And so that's whenever Jeff says, well, you got to have something, even if it's not perfect. That's what we mean. It's not like Obamacare. That was kind of a false equivalency that Dan drew there, because Obamacare was establishing a system going forward. That was a semi-permanent or permanent thing. This is something that was meant to meet an issue or address a need in the now. And in that regard, it is a good start. Now, like I say, if we head down this path towards privatization, Dan's absolutely right. It's wrong. And Dan's absolutely right. Liberals need to stand up and say, listen, we privatized in the short term as a stopgap, or maybe even not in the short term, but just for people who live too far away from the VA or whatever. It's still a single-payer funded system. It's just run by the private sector. We've got some success with other examples of that in America, as long as that doesn't, become the norm, because then it's just a sellout to the insurance industry. But anyway, at the end of the day, this is a start, and as long as it's a start in the right place and not a start towards the other place, it's a good thing.
So let me expand on that just a little bit, and then we'll go to Dan to close us out. I just want to expand by saying, like, accountability is definitely something that needs to be done, not just at government, but I think we as liberals, we need to hold our politicians and other liberals accountable as well for not pushing back against things that are the stopgap measures that no longer get pushed forward, right? Dan was right in the way that we accept these wishy-washy stopgap measures, and then we're just like, oh, well, it works. Why not? We'll stick with it, right? Well, you stick with what works. Well, yeah, but there are things that will work infinitely better if we continue to push on it. And that's where we're getting into the wishy-washy liberal thing, is that we stop. We don't actually continue to push further left on some of these issues, like on Obamacare. I'm pretty sure that Obama's like, mission accomplished. We're done. What are you talking about? Hang the banner. I got Obamacare passed. But it's not at all done, because there are still so many problems with that specific thing. And it will be just like the problems with this specific stopgap measure. Like, the VA needs to be fixed. This is a good Band-Aid, as good as Band-Aids can get, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem of the VA itself. And that's what needs to be focused on, so that we can get it back to VA and remove this Band-Aid. because what's underneath needs to heal first. All right. So Dan, take us home.
You know, the last few topics on this show tonight, I've mentioned the idea of progressives doing a really bad job at making their case for government. And Jordan, your thesis statement is why I think they've done a terrible job, because your thesis statement is essentially, when you're talking about the VA, you said the idea that government has terrible bureaucracy issues that the private sector wouldn't have, and that if they were in the private sector, this would be cleared up. I have no idea why you feel that way.
Not what I said. That's
Okay,
not
well,
what
that
I
was
said.
all right. Well, go back to what you're saying. I'll let you make your point, because what I heard was, in the situations that you were giving, you were saying in a government situation we don't have the ability to stop that. It'll happen in government no matter what, kind of shrug. But if this was private, those people will be fired.
No, what I pointed to was a specific example
Okay.
of doctors not seeing patients, which would not happen in the private system because hospitals bill by the service. So the idea is to cram as many patients in as you can, and that's one reason why we have bad private healthcare in America.
Right.
Because there's a lack of actual service. But these doctors, because the VA doesn't bill that way, were able to see 4 patients a day and then falsify the list and make it look like they were getting their work done. And also, to your other point, what I did say is that government does inherently have these big bureaucracies, but that does not mean we have to settle for them, which is the conservative point. Government has problems with bureaucracy, therefore government does not work. Liberals say, no, government has a problem with bureaucracy, so let's work to fix it. That was my point. Not that government cannot work. And my point was that we need the VA and we need to reform it, but you can't do that overnight. What you can do overnight is pass the bill that was passed overnight here.
So then we would agree that a public VA, a government-funded VA, is a much better alternative.
Absolutely, yeah. That's why I've explicitly said several times, if this is a path towards privatizing the VA, then it's completely headed the wrong direction.
I personally don't see how it's not, but we'll leave that aside for right now. But I guess the major point that I really wanted to drive home is the idea that these are these things, like government has the money. A lot of times I hear on these cable shows or around the table on these kind of discussions that, well, how are they going to fix the problem right now? Yeah, government can do that. If a hurricane hits the eastern seaboard tomorrow, there's money, right? Like and if you don't say that, troops coming home, the VA veterans, especially when how much money you made on these wars, aren't a priority, then yeah, I do believe that we're letting the right sort of take over the conversation about what government can do and what it can't do. If we just immediately think, well, you've got to do some sort of two-tier situation because how else would it ever get done? That's where we lack leadership so badly in progressive politics. This, of course, could get done. Like the things that progressive politics have done in the past in different wars, this is such a small pittance of what we've done in the past. So anyways, that's the bottom line. Is I really think it's a failure of leadership to say, no, this is our responsibility as a society to take care of these guys and women.
All right, and we'll end this segment on that, and we're going to shift away from talking about veterans and the VA administration, the Veterans Administration, sorry. It'd be the Veterans Administration. That wouldn't make much sense now, would it? But anyway, we're going to skip away from the VA and talk about Texas and how they're horrible, how they have a horrible party platform. Fascinating. And, of course, we're going to see Anderson Cooper tear that shit up. It'll be great. The Texas GOP recently revealed their party platform. And, boy, is it interesting. Now, this platform contains many little gems, such as their strident opposition to socialism. Okay. Fair enough. They also made sure to ban Sharia law, because that was an issue in Texas, apparently. They also opposed doing any sort of constitutional convention to amend the Constitution. Interesting. They also made sure to oppose reparations for slavery, which I didn't think was something that a lot of people were fighting for, and fighting the insidious Agenda 21. And this is just among many other things, ranging from crazy to actually somewhat sensible. Pretty much the only sensible things in there that I've seen were getting rid of NDAA and the Patriot Act. So, hey, points for that, I guess. But a good example of what isn't sensible is their demonization of homosexuality that is inscribed right into the platform. For example, and this is quoting from the platform, quote, homosexuality must not be presented as an acceptable alternative lifestyle in public policy, nor should family be redefined to include homosexual couples. We believe there should be no granting of special legal entitlements or creation of special status for homosexual behavior, regardless of state of origin. And in it, this platform also supports the debunked psychologically damaging idea of gay reparative therapy. Cure the gays. Quote, we recognize the legitimacy and value of counseling, which offers reparative therapy and treatment to patients who are seeking escape from the homosexual lifestyle. No laws or executive orders shall be imposed to limit or restrict access to this type of therapy. Now, gay reparative therapy has been declared invalid by nearly all the relevant medical organizations, and in 2009, the American Psychological Association, or APA, published a report that looked at all the peer-reviewed literature on conversion therapy and concluded that the evidence unequivocally showed that attempts to change sexual orientation are ineffective. You cannot change the gay. You can't pray away the gay. You can't cure the gay. It just don't work. But since it is the Texas Republican Party, I'm pretty sure Rick Perry, governor of Texas, would like to add the APA to the list of organizations that he'd like to get rid of. That's if he could remember them all. Now, one of the Texas lawmakers, named Brian Hughes, went on Anderson Cooper's TV show on CNN and was grilled by Anderson Cooper. Check this out. Got a video of it. It's awesome.
Representative Hughes, why did you think it was necessary to put something in the state party platform advocating so-called reparative therapy for gay people? Why is that in the Republican Party platform?
The language is in the platform because we want to make sure that people have rights. And we heard from people that wanted access to that kind of counseling, that kind of therapy. And so we believe in free speech and free choice. It's not being forced on anyone, but for folks who want it, it should be available.
But is that under threat? I mean, was that really even a question? I know in New Jersey and California, it's still allowed. I know a lot of people in Texas kind of have been indicating that it's been banned, but you know that's not true.
That there were concerns from California, New Jersey, maybe other states, that it could be limited or taken away in some cases. A neighbor of one of our delegates had been through this therapy. It was helpful to him, and he was concerned it might be taken away. This is about giving people choices. If they want this, it should be available to them.
Even if the vast majority of medical associations say that actually this form of alleged counseling or alleged therapy is actually can be harmful to kids. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Counseling Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American School Counselor Association, the National Association of School Psychologists, National Association of Social Workers. I mean, they represent 500,000 mental health professionals. They all say this is not a mental disorder and it's not something that needs to be cured.
Well, there are members of those groups who feel differently. Some testified before the committee. Some have testified in other places. People testified before the platform committee at our convention, both pro and con. Individuals,
that's actually
also
not
professionals,
true,
therapists.
You know that it's actually
I beg your pardon?
That's actually not true. I know people testified for it in front of the platform, but according to a number of groups, gay groups there, who weren't even allowed to have booths at where the platform was, they weren't allowed to argue against it because of a parliamentary procedure. Debate was closed before they had a chance to voice their opposition to it, and it was immediately put to a vote. You're aware of that, right?
I think we're conflating the process. In the platform committee, there was testimony on the issue. When the bill came to the floor,
who testified, you know?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
The fact that you view being gay or you characterize it as a mistake or something that should be changed, really kind of maybe says more about your position than what your words actually say. Over the years, this party platform has actually had a lot of language which is very anti-gay. In fact, up until this year, your platform said homosexuality tears at the fabric of society. And that's a platform I assume you supported, correct?
Well, as we discussed, there was a debate on these issues at the convention. Some folks wanted stronger language, some folks wanted different language.
Right, but in the past, that language was in
with.
there. So you supported that, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
You believe that homosexuality tears the fabric of society.
Wow. All right. Hey, at least he's being honest, right? So this guy, of course, supports this harmful, stupid, ridiculous gay reparative therapy that's been shown to harm children more than it is to help them, which it doesn't help them at all, because he supports freedom. Yes, the freedom to hate yourself, put yourself through torture to deny who you are for no reason, because you can't actually become ungay. Now, his arguments boiled down to, and it didn't show that, I didn't get to it in the clip, it was a long clip. Basically, his arguments boiled down to God, love the sinner, hate the sin, and freedom. You know, freedom to choose. Because of a guy he knows that may have lied to him about it working, if it even exists. Anyway, I could go on all day about this guy and his bullshit, but I'd like to open it up to the panel since this is a panel show, and I want to start with you, Dan.
Yeah, I think the great part about all of these kinds of conservative movements, whether it's climate change or now, homophobia continued from the last 30 years of public debate about it, is the idea of the I know a guy strategy, which is like, it's like they're basically so desperate, despite mountains of evidence against their causes. They're like, well, I went to Google and I found somebody. Like, that's essentially where their debate is now. So yeah, it's super depressing. I mean, like, these ideas of it's hurting the fabric of society. It's just so absurd. It's almost, it's depressing at such an alarming rate. And I wish all of the cable news hosts would have these guys on and do that kind of pinata treatment to them. So by the way, sir, what was the person who testified's name? I wasn't there. It's what happens there. So right. So every time we challenge you on a point, you really don't have a point. So I wish that the emperor no clothes tactic from journalists would be used a lot more often. And I wish that it wasn't just Maddow and Anderson Cooper who had to do this constantly. It would be nice to see all of the press take these guys to task, and the local news. It's silly, it's stupid, and it's also anti-freedom, because a lot of the people you're talking about are children. Like, the people that go into these kind of ridiculous voodoo therapy ideas are not necessarily a 40-year-old guy who's just decided after years and years of homosexuality that maybe I should check this out. It's like a 15-year-old kid whose parents are trying to send him to a camp to try to straighten him out. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to protect. If you're not protecting children, who are we protecting? But of course, the right wing and these kinds of people, they'll look the other way this time around, because we're big on protecting children, but not the gay children. So that's really what's frustrating about this, and there's not a whole lot you can say. It's not a two-sided issue, obviously. This is insane.
Right, and I love how they attempted to make it a two-sided issue. Well, there's another side. Once again, I had to cut that out since it was a really long clip, but I'll put it in the comments for full context, or I'm sorry, in the description when I post the video up later for full context. He basically said, well, the both sides, there are two sides to this issue, and they're both equal. And that's the problem with the media that we get into. And I'm glad, and like CNN is especially guilty with this when it comes to climate change, but I'm really actually glad to see that they're not taking it with this issue, that Anderson Cooper is just continuing to pummel this guy over and over again. It was fantastic. Speaking of the media angle, let's go to Stephen, and I want to see what you think about this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Dan said. I mean, this platform, first of all, just on the platform itself, do the Texans think that they're going to win on this platform? I mean, they must do if they've put it forward, and that just goes through that they're in such a bubble in Texas, and for a lot of the southern states in America. It's just incredible. And the thing that annoys me, particularly about the language, is the Republicans and the right, well, not all Republicans, but the right wing is always talking about kind of the gay lifestyle. And I don't know what they mean by the gay lifestyle. It's almost what I think they're thinking is that they have some sort of weird caricature of the gay lifestyle, kind of the Californian gay kind of "ooh, how's your father" sort of. It's just nonsense. I don't know how. I mean, those sort of stereotypes existed back in the 20s, back in the 30s. It's like times have changed, and and just towards kind of the science, he's saying, oh well, kind of we want to have a discussion about this, and some people are in favour of it. I mean, personally, I feel quite strongly about all these pseudosciences. Like, I don't care if you're in favour of wanting to have kind of crystal healing therapy. No, you're not allowed it because it doesn't work. It's a waste of money. It's a drain on the economy when you could be spending your money helping the economy in some other way. Same with this gay reparative therapy. It's not therapy. It's nonsense. It's actively hurting children. The people who wrote this platform in Texas are basically saying we're in favour of harming children. That's essentially what all the clinical professionals have said. What this therapy does, it harms children in many instances. And that's what they seem to be arguing in favour of. The guy's a moron. The Texas kind of GOP platform writers, they're morons. And fair play to Anderson Cooper, because in respect to that, Dan's right. The media does need to kind of start beating these people with sticks more often. There are very few people in the mainstream media in America who will come out when they have these absolute insane nut jobs and attack them. I mean, okay, Bill O'Reilly, your Sean Hannity's and Fox News, they'll attack what they consider nut jobs when those nut jobs are just actually putting forward fairly reasonable positions just on the other side of the coin. Whereas, in the UK, for the most part, we have a good number of journalists who will hold politicians' feet to the fire when they come out and say stupid stuff. In America, Anderson Cooper does a fairly good job, but I mean, he's about the only one on CNN that I can think of. Maddow does a fairly good job. Chris Hayes every now and again, but it's kind of if there's some sort of incentive where every time that you piss off a politician, you get a pay raise, I'd be happy with that sort of system.
There you go. All right, we're going to go to you, Jordan. What do you think?
There we go. Fuck it, we'll do it live. I'm going to hit this from two angles. One, I want to kind of dial back the CNN praise because let's keep it real. Like, this isn't CNN refusing to let this issue go. This is Anderson Cooper, who has a vested interest in this issue, refusing to let it go. If this had been any other host on CNN, they would have let it go. So it's not like CNN is standing up and doing the right thing here. I guess maybe they're letting Anderson Cooper, fight for something that's very dear to him. So, I guess maybe they should get credit for that, but that seems like the most mundane thing to allow a news anchor to do. So just I kind of want to temper that a little bit. But then going forward, Jeff, if you could, I want to point out why Texas should not be doing this. Dan and Stephen have already pointed out from a humanitarian, a common sense, what about the children point of view, way better than I could. There's no need for me to expound on that any further. But Jeff, if you could read, there was one thing that they brought up about not granting homosexuals any special status or something like that. That you read off whenever you were listing the things there?
Yeah. Let me read it to you again. We believe that there should be no granting of special legal entitlements or creation of special status for homosexual behavior, regardless of state of origin.
Okay, so first off, I want to point out, one, why that's a nonsensical thing, because there is no push to create some special status or unique status for homosexuals. There's a push for them to have the right to have the same status everyone else does. It's not like there's some kind of super married that gay people can be that straight people can't, that has extra rights attached to it. That's ridiculous. But then, so after them, I guess, pushing this plank that doesn't make any sense and is addressing an issue that not only doesn't exist, but I can't imagine a way that it could exist, unless maybe if you got gay married, then you could break the law. I don't know. But anyway, they create this plank that no one's fighting for, and then they themselves fight for the nonsensical plank. And what I mean by that is because by pushing to make this gay restorative therapy a legitimate medical treatment or whatever, they're giving gays two special statuses that straight people don't have. One, they've created a pre-existing condition that I suppose insurance companies wouldn't be allowed to deny them for, and of course Texas is one of the states fighting. So, I'm sorry?
Yeah. I was just going to say, being gay, covered by Obamacare, only in Texas.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got that. There's a special status that this creates for gay people, and then also, well, I guess the pre-existing condition not being denied is one, and then the fact that you can get your insurance to pay for witch doctors in Texas, but only if you're gay. So again, there's another special status that this position gives. So someone needs to point out to the Texas GOP that they are violating their own rules. And in order to stay true to their conservative values, they need to ban gay restorative therapy.
Wow, that makes a very interesting case. All right, let's go to you, Dan. Take us home, sir. Take us home. You are muted, sir.
I am. Are we good now? Ooh, Google Plus is revolting against us. So this is a couple of things that I think are really interesting with this story, which is we'll take it back to Steven's point. So let's go to the media first. Let's take care of that. So I totally agree with both of you who've mentioned the idea of like maybe not giving CNN too much credit. One of my favorite lines that Jon Stewart ever had about Anderson Cooper was that he has a segment called Keeping Him Honest. Jon Stewart once remarked, that would be like me having a segment on the Daily Show called Comedian Tells Jokes for Laughs. Like, it's supposed to be your job, right? Like, the whole show is supposed to be keeping them honest. So we'll forget that for a second. I don't mind that he has a vested interest in that and that he did his job. I just wish the whole show would be that all the time. And I think that that's sort of what we should be going for. The second point that I would bring up with somebody brought up, Stephen, I think it was lifestyle. And I think that's the sad thing about at the end of this whole thing, they don't really care. They don't really probably believe that you can do it with therapy, but it's still a huge voting base, and we've got elections coming up, and these are things. That's what they're playing to. They know that it's all kind of BS, but to say that out loud in public still gets people riled, and it's still a way to get money. You send that in a mailer, and that's a lot more interesting than it is to be like, why don't you take a closer look at the issue, sir? And that's, unfortunately, as we've said a couple times before in this show, listen, that whole bill is that whole section is going to be about as useless as you could possibly make it once the states, one Supreme Court after another and after another start going, sorry, every state's going to say, no, actually, that actually breaks our Constitution. So, they can pretend that gay marriage is never going to exist, and we're going to see a whole bunch of people try to stick their head in the sand and pretend that, society isn't progressing. But at the end of the day, I think what's really depressing about the whole situation is that we're going to end up in a place where you're going to see more and more of these mailers, more and more of this ridiculous, out of left field, language that really doesn't mean anything. They probably won't really legislate. They just put it in their platform because, hey, look, we put it in our platform, homophobes. You can vote for us. And that's what's really sad. Is that they're gaming the system. They're trying to get the last 3 miles out of homophobia for their own voting interests, and that's really where things get depressing. And I will say, from a Canadian standpoint, it does bring down to this kind of crazy stuff that we get in Canada, because we get all your cable news channels and we get a lot of American content up here. People were doing kind of a victory lap a little bit this week because we in Ontario elected our first, the nation's first elected openly gay female premier. And, everybody was like, what was really awesome is we just did that without it never even came up in the campaign. It wasn't even an issue. And so everybody was kind of like at the end of that, like, well, that's pretty good. But, you know, as awesome as that is, it's still sad that you actually still have to say that. Like, isn't it amazing that people aren't hate-filled? Like, you know, going back to another great comedian where, you know, Chris Rock, one of my favorite lines he has is, you know, when he talks about racism, he said, my grandfather didn't suddenly deserve to eat at the same table as you. He didn't gain rights. White people got less crazy. And I really think that that's a great point about the, you know, homophobia issue or the anti-gay issue, which is just people are getting less crazy. And, of course, some of these people are getting more crazy. And it's sad that they're trying to game it for votes. But, you know, things are going the right direction on gay rights, and these people are losing. And I wish that all media would pinata them in front of the world to see, like that Anderson Cooper segment, because the most important part of that segment isn't about yelling like Bill O'Reilly. It was about facts. It was about listing the medical associations that believe that what you're trying to say is valid for taxpayer dollars is complete hooey by all of these associations. And then, you know, that's where the difference between, you know, spanking somebody on Fox News and spanking them in real news. Facts.
And I think that that's a really, really good thing to end that segment on. And we go to our final depressing story of the night. I know, I'm sorry, guys. We're going to end it on a low note. What can you do, right? Too bad we don't have anything like clickbaity to end it on, but we all know how Jordan feels about clickbait, and Dan as well. We're not fans of the clickbait, so we're going to end up with something super serious, and it's the return of debtors' prisons and deadly consequences related. Hold. Okay. Now, there have been a few stories about the return of debtors' prisons, where you can get put in jail for not having enough money for court fees, then being charged for being in jail, which becomes a vicious cycle for those unfortunate enough to be trapped in it. And now, just recently, this cycle has claimed someone's life. The life of 55-year-old Eileen DeNino. Now, DeNino died while serving a 2-day sentence on truancy charges. Now, DeNino has 7 children, and those truancy charges go back to 1999. Now, the fines and penalties related to the truancy charges were somewhere around at least $2,000 for 55 violations that go back to 1999. So how did she die? Well, investigators found no evidence of foul play or anything suspicious related, but reports from the Reading Eagle say that she was on medication for high blood pressure and other health issues. But they also report that prison officials told them that they didn't issue her any of her medication. Now, some of you may be thinking, why didn't she just pay the fines or get someone to help her? Well, DeNino was unemployed, living with a relative, and was on welfare. Now, to their credit, the 2 judges that preside over truancy cases where she lived were frustrated and had offered to help drop her fines. But like many poor people with significant health issues, she was unable to gather the documentation necessary to prove that she was unable to pay that fine. Now, a lot of that information that they required needed extensive paperwork. Things like bank statements, income statements, sometimes bills, and other paperwork. And some of that paperwork costs money to acquire. And with health problems and a limited income, because welfare does not pay all that much, it's difficult to get around to all the different places where you have to file to get that paperwork. Most poor people don't even own a car, which can add and attribute to the problem. So, while the judges certainly tried to work with her, poverty is a very, very pervasive, very difficult problem to deal with. And laws that allow someone to be in prison for not being able to pay a fine is basically the same thing as criminalizing poverty. And unfortunately, that's what we do here in America. We criminalize the poor and the homeless for being poor and homeless. And we've seen it all the time. So, I want to go to you guys here on the panel. I want to ask you, did you ever think that we would be talking about debtors' prisons or something very close to them in practice here in the 21st century? We'll start with you, Jordan.
Man, no, this is and hats off to NPR for really kind of bringing not this particular story, but the reason why you've seen a few stories about debtors' prisons break into national media coverage over the past week or so is because NPR really started fighting on this issue about 2 weeks ago. So bravo NPR, that's what real journalism does. Yeah, this is to Dan's point earlier about how we've become a society of debt. We've also known, I don't know how much of a problem Canada has with this or England, but in America it's really pronounced. We've also become a society of prisonization, and so whenever you make debt a reason for prisonization and you become a society of debt and a society of imprisonment, guess what happens? You send people to prison for debt. And also, I want to point out another thing here. Let me go ahead, if I may, and I think without Sean here, the conversation wouldn't take this turn, but I want to go ahead and just throw it out and squash it at the same time. This is a person who looks like there's some personal responsibility issues. I understand that it's difficult to do paperwork. I'm not real type A personality, whatever you want to call it. Gathering paperwork and filing is really difficult for me, but I still managed to get it done. Now, I have support and resources maybe she doesn't have, yada, yada, yada. I want to throw that. I want to realize we're not saying this woman is some saint who is just being completely taken advantage of. But that doesn't matter, because being bad at getting paperwork and maybe being a little irresponsible, maybe even being lazy if you want to throw out the worst possible scenario, is not a reason to die in prison. So before you go to YouTube and start commenting about how this woman just reaped, what she sowed, no, she didn't. That's cruel and unusual punishment. That's unconstitutional. Failing to file paperwork should not result in death. That is not a natural consequence of failing to file paperwork. So just let's squash that conversation. We'll acknowledge the reality, but realize that it doesn't freaking matter. That's not what this is about. Secondly, I want to point out she was in jail because her daughter missed school. So not only is she going to jail over debt, over fines she couldn't pay, she's going to jail over fines she couldn't pay because of the actions of someone else. Now, again, I'm the more, whenever it comes to social issues, I'm probably the most conservative person on the panel. I'm real big on, traditional family values and stuff like that. I understand parents are responsible for what their kids do. But at the same time, you got a balance of reason, right? That's a non-issue here. Okay, maybe she wasn't being the best parent. Maybe somehow her daughter was skipping school and she wasn't doing what she should have done about it. Maybe her daughter was skipping school and there's nothing she could have done about it, because kids do that too. But, whatever. Again, don't even have that conversation, because it's beside the point. It doesn't freaking matter. Again, your daughter missing school a few times is not a reason to die in prison. So what's going to happen. People are going to have this discussion. The way news cycles work in America, Fox News is going to get out and try to tear this woman down. MSNBC is going to get out and try to make her into some persecuted saint. And everybody's going to miss the actual issue, which is that we're throwing everybody in prison for every reason under the sun. And sometimes people die for no reason because of it. And that's freaking pathetic. This is the United States of America. We're supposed to be above this. This is not freaking... I don't want to offend viewers since we do have an international audience. I'm not going to throw out examples. But you understand what I'm getting at. We're supposed to be a world leader. We're supposed to be a 21st century developed nation. This is barbaric, and this is medieval. Whatever adverb, adjective you want to throw out, it's pathetic and it's inexcusable. We failed our homeless. We failed our poor. We failed our veterans. The hits just keep on coming.
All right. Let's go to you, Stephen.
Well, for me, obviously the death is a completely egregious. It shouldn't have happened. For me, personally, I mean, okay, yes, the death is bad, but sounds awful me saying that. But the fact that you're charging parents for their kids being truant, for me, that just seems nonsensical. I mean, the government has to step in and say, look, you've got to try and get your kids to go to school. Like, we've got to see you making some effort to try and get your kids to go to school. But if your kids are just, just not turning up and it's impossible for you to force them to go to school, then I don't see why you should be financially burdened. Because let's face it as well, those sort of fines are going to more heavily impact kind of the poorest people in society. I mean, for me, I didn't have a choice. I lived at school, so I could never play truant. But just the idea that your child, I mean, what she just said? Oh, I'm homeschooling them then. Like it just seems ridiculous to me that you're charging people, and I mean, it's what Jordan said, that you're being put in prison and essentially killed by the state in some way, and that's not the best way of phrasing it, because of someone else's actions. It amazes me. I mean, there is no way that, well, first of all, I just don't think there's no way that someone in a UK prison would have gone to jail because one of their 7 kids, hadn't gone to school a couple of times and racked some fees. You just wouldn't go to jail for that. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Right. It's one of those things where it's debt just feeds into this vicious debt cycle that you can't escape from, and debt itself is a prison, and so you've got real prison and you've also got debt prison, and then you're combining them, and it's even worse, and you just can't escape. But let's go to Dan here and let you get your input.
It's funny, I was looking through the news this week and I saw a business that has started to do quite well making bulletproof blankets for students. And I just think, like, is there anything left that we can't find ways to profit off of? And you end up with, shootings or job creators now. So I mean, like, that's just sort of where we're at. And this is where this reminds me of here too. This issue, I'm going to go past the part where she passed away, which was really unfortunate, and the specifics of this woman herself and why she was there, and kind of echo the sentiments of everybody else, which is, why was she there? I mean, that's the real heart of the story. Like, why is somebody in prison for this? This is the crux of as you guys said, like the pay for the pay system, the profit system of prisons, the prison industrial complex, if you will, that actually was exported up here recently with our conservative government, where they tried to open a lot of new prisons, and we actually had a pretty amusing, almost through the looking glass segment on our national news, where somebody in Texas was telling Canada, please don't do what we did. The weird things that are happening these days with the conservative government up here. But these are the situations where you have to put people in prison. And what's really troubling about this is I'm really not that surprised, and why I'm saying that is that this is the culture we live in, and the debt situation is the only way the economy is working. Like, the average credit card debt from a single family is apparently like $16,000 on one card. The average debt of the consumer, say like in Texas, is about the same as there's a famous line one of the politicians in Texas said it's the same as a truck, right? Like, it's 22 grand. You could buy a truck with the average debt people are coming from, and of course a lot of that is on students. And when I hosted a show back in 2008, we were trying to get people to really start caring about millennials and student debt, and we're going, listen, canary in the coal mine, this is a huge problem. And somebody on the panel made a joke about, well, we'll always bring back debtors prison. And I thought, you know what? Don't be surprised, because our culture is getting meaner and meaner, and we like to find ways to tax the poorest among us and try to make money off them. And what a great way, put these folks in prison, justify making more, building more prisons, and and no one really cares about them. And that, I agree with Jordan, to echo kudos to NPR, who's got more public funding than most journalism. to actually do why, to prove the point of why you need public funding in journalism, which is that's a story that needs a lot more coverage, because it's not just this one lady. This is happening, all across different places, Ohio, right through, and so more and more you see these stories, and more you're going to, because that's a culture we have. Nobody's got real money. Everyone's in debt. And nobody at the top of the government really knows what to do, because everybody's making money off that. And if you stop buying stickies and snuggies, our economy's in some serious problems in North America. And so, this is a serious conversation, I think, that I'm glad somebody shone a light on it, because I don't think this is going to slow down.
Right. Absolutely. Jordan, you got something to say?
I want to not disagree with the point that has been made a couple times, that in fact, I made it myself, that the imprisonment in society in America is a real problem, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've started to privatize prisons. But I want to point out something here, and again, I don't know if this is necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. I guess it's a little bit of both. I've been doing some research while we're looking into this, because I want to fact check ourselves while we're saying this. I'm sorry, and do we know the mother's name? Do we have her name? Danino? Yeah, okay. Eileen Danino did not die in a private prison. She died in a county jail. Mm-hmm. She did not go to debt because of fines that she owed to a private company, or she did not go to prison because of debt she had to a private company. She went to prison because of debt that she owed to her local government. So this is a government entity putting someone in a government prison over debt and them dying for it. So that's horrible, because that is an act of evil by the government that's supposed to be by the people, of the people, and for the people. But it's promised. There's a glimmer of hope in it that we can take this horrible situation and make something good about it, because there's no private industry bankrolling officials on this one. This is a government that can be held accountable, and people can demand change and make that change, because these government officials don't have some defense industry or banking industry back on this particular instance that that they're actually representing. This is a government trying to take care of itself, and people can rise up and kick that government out, and that's exactly what the people oh goodness gracious, in Pennsylvania. What's the name of the city again? It's in Pennsylvania. What's the name of the city? It's Berks County. That's what the people of Berks County need to do, is rise up and tell their local government, this is inexcusable. There's no reason this should have happened.
I agree with you on that, but I would also add that it's the culture of the last 25 to 30 years of that system that has now trickled into the government system, which is the solution for everything is throwing someone in prison. Like, no matter what,
completely agree.
You got a dime bag.
I'm not denying the reality there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And completely agree. I'm not denying the reality of privatization, and that's another negative aspect of privatization, is the way they do business bleeds over into the non-private prisons, and we see that here. And we've seen that's what Elizabeth Warren is fighting with the government using kids as revenue generators, through student loans. Mm-hmm. Just because the government does it doesn't make it okay. Like, as liberals, we have a duty, because of our ideology, that government is supposed to play a role in society, to stand up whenever government is being evil, and that's what's going on here in Berks County. This is an evil act of government.
And just to be fair down the line, I to echo what you just said, is that this is not, I would argue, a partisan issue. Both governments love to do this because it makes money, like going back to the student loan idea and both putting people in debt. Nobody in power is going to tell folks to stop shopping, whether it was George W. Bush, in 9/11, or whether it's Obama throughout, bailouts. It's okay, we'll figure out a way to balance all of this stuff. And that's where, the debt culture comes in and starts seeping over into, well, what do we do about the debt culture? And unfortunately, I think you're going to start seeing more people say they should be in prison, because it really feeds into that old school narrative of, personal responsibility. Why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? That we've seen sort of this hostile belief of where homeless people belong, whether how Giuliani cleaned up New York City, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This idea of everyone just go to prison and get away from us. And that's the saddest thing, I think, is that it's about, we just don't want to see it. You know, we don't care if we actually solve the problem or not. We just don't want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And
All right,
that's
Stephen.
sad.
Right. Absolutely. Stephen, we'll go to you, and then I'll round out the segment.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Dan just said there, is that for a lot of these sort of problems, certainly in American society, and we have different versions, not to the extreme extent that you do in America, that as long as it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, if it's not affecting me personally or my family members, and kind of for the politicians, if it's not a huge thing, like if people aren't getting too worked up about it because the media isn't covering it, then let's not bother dealing with it, even though it is a serious issue. And, you know, what John said right at the very start, credit to NPR for doing this sort of journalism, because these are interesting and important stories. I always, like, in kind of every time we talk about the media, I always end up bringing out the point about whether it's an interesting story, because that's the only reason why the media will cover it these days. If it's interesting, then it will bring in an audience, and then that's how they generate their revenue. And this is an interesting story. You know, there's so many different angles to it. We've talked about whether it's kind of, you can talk about private prisons, but it's a state government, about kind of truancy in schools, debtors' prisons. There's so many things that the media can talk about this one specific issue, let alone the whole wider issue, that NPR in general just deserves a lot more credit than it does receive, and I think people should take them a lot more seriously and value them much more than they currently do.
Right. And speaking of NPR and sort of rounding out the end of the segment, I just wanted to add in a couple of more cases that were also discussed on NPR. There was a 19-year-old that was jailed for 3 days after catching a smallmouth bass during rock bass season. He couldn't pay the fine. Homeless man sentenced to a year in jail, over $2,600 in penalties by that he incurred by shoplifting a $2 can of beer. A recovering drug user sent to jail 3 times for being unable to make payments on nearly $10,000 in court costs. These are the kinds of things that we see. These are the kinds of things that we jail people for. Some of these people, I'm not really going to say the guy catching the bass needs help, but the homeless man, the recovering drug user, these people need help, not prison. So really, when it comes down to it, this is absolutely, we're living in insane Dickinsonian times. And I just have to ask, when will we wake up and realize that as a nation and as a society, that you can't punish people out of being poor? And I think that's the important lesson that you have to take away, is that you can't. You cannot punish people out of being poor.
And just to make the point, because Sean isn't here, that I think he would maybe perhaps make, which is, even if none of these arguments tonight that you heard in this segment have moved you, perhaps the financial one will. It's not cheaper. It's expensive to house these people in prison than just letting them pay the forgiving the $60 bass fee that they've riled up. This is the thing that, at the end of the day, it's not even smart from a financial standpoint, because the state's paying more money, because you end up in these situations where it would have just been easier to forgive the problem.
Right, absolutely. And we do spend more money on basically jailing the homeless. And there was a recent study that came out that said that we spend more money on jailing the homeless than it would to take to put them in homes. And that is also insane. All right, last point by Jordan, and then we totally got to wrap up the show.
All right, I'll make it quick. Dan is absolutely right. I mean, so if you're not moved by the human issue, by every little disclaimer and go screw yourself thing I threw out at the beginning about how what's important here is people are dying because of debt, and that's cruel and unusual punishment, and it's unconstitutional. If you don't care about human beings, if you don't care about the Constitution, if all you care about is the budget or whatever, then yes, this is not even cheaper. This loses on all 3 fronts. But to Jeff's point, how freaking sad is it that Dan has to legitimately make that argument? Like, that's not Dan, like, trying to be funny and pointing out a little, kind of a goofy thing that, hey, and also, no. People, there are really people out there that need to hear that because that's the argument they're going to use. How incredibly sad is that we have to reason with people that maybe a human life is not worth a $10,000 debt. That's freaking pathetic, America.
And by the way, I just have to point out that Dan is also a comedian. And here's Dan, as a comedian, making much more poignant, important points than I think a lot of people in our news media tend to make. But anyway, that is, we got to wrap up the show. So.
You're not even with the last second edition.
Nope.
Oh.
Nope. Doesn't
Thanks for
exist.
watching TYT Nation, everybody. It's been wonderful. Good night.
But no, we're way over time, so I want to thank you guys for watching on the live stream, and if you're watching on YouTube, awesome. Thank you guys. Make sure to share and like and share this video and subscribe to us here on TYT Nation. I want to thank my panelists, of course, all TYT fans and members, even our latest edition, which would be Sean, joining really super late.
You're welcome.
Yes. Thank you, Stephen, Jordan. Thank you for your time. And Dan, thank you again for joining us. It's always great to have you. Everybody make sure to check out Dan on youtube.com/cynicallytested, where he does a truth mashup show every Sunday night at 8:30, and a podcast on Thursday nights. Is it Thursday nights or is it Thursday afternoons?
It'll be there on Thursday at some point whenever we wake up.
There you go. Awesome. Definitely check out that show. It's a fantastic show. And, of course, check out our show here every Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, and Friday night for the Social Justice Hour. I'm filling in for, of course, host Rhiannon Avenine, who is out on technical issues. She'll be back when she can afford a new computer. So,
Social justice.
9 p.m. Eastern. And finally, if you want to support the show, and actually not finally, if you want to support the show, go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/TYT Nation. I want to thank those who do support us right now with your donations every month. You guys help to keep the show going. And finally, for all of those who are new on the live stream, you guys are welcome to actually join in the show. TYT Community is all about you guys. So if you're interested in becoming, to actually being on the panel with us having these important discussions, you can email me at jeffw@tytnetwork.com, or you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/TYT Nation. Send me a message. We'd love to have new people on this panel. Join us. We're always looking for new panelists to join us. So please do make sure to send me a message. That's pretty much it. We're not going to have a show next week, but we'll be back the week after with a new News and Politics Hour and a new Social Justice Hour. So make sure to tune into those. You guys have an awesome weekend and an awesome week. Thank you, and we will see you again. Say goodbye,
Good night.
everybody.
God bless.
Spurs!
Sean.
Let's go Spurs. San Antonio.
Good night.